you all for joining us. It's great to be here with you all today. So for today's Lunch and Learn, we are really excited to share our vision for managing for resiliency in the Central Appalachians. We'll talk in detail about our reforestation work, especially the work we're doing on minelands in Eastern Kentucky, and we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So don't be shy, think of your questions, and we should have plenty of time at the end of our presentation for you all to ask them.
And Dana, speaking of not being shy, I have to jump back in because I didn't handle one of my assigned tasks, which was just to let folks know that we are recording this session. We do that so we can share it with folks who hope to make it but weren't able to. So I was supposed to give folks a heads up on that. So there's the heads up. Back to you, Dana. Sorry.
Sounds great. So in terms of our program, I will be setting the stage with some general background, and then I'll hand the microphone off to Chris Garland to share some project-specific details about our restoration work. And I want to go ahead and introduce Chris. Chris is our Central Appalachians project director. He leads our work on the Cumberland Forest Project, and he also leads all of our forestry work streams, which are focused on natural climate solutions. You'll probably hear us use that term a few times during our talk today, so I'll just go ahead and define it. So natural climate solutions are conservation and restoration actions that result in carbon sequestration. All right, so before we dive into the content, I just wanted to spend a few minutes, we'll bring the slide deck up. I'm just going to take a really brief few slides to talk about who the Nature Conservancy is. And that's because I know we have a few new faces in the crowd, which is really exciting. All right, next slide. So the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we are laser focused on tackling climate change and on safeguarding biodiversity through protecting our lands, waters, and oceans. And here at the Nature Conservancy, how we work is just as important as what we work on. And we take our values very seriously. These include a nonpartisan, non-confrontational approach, a focus on science, a focus on bringing diverse partners and stakeholders together to find solutions. And I'm also very proud to say that our organization now has a C-level position, our Chief Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, who is focused on helping the Nature Conservancy understand how we can better foster diversity and inclusion in our work. At the Nature Conservancy, we work in all 50 states and in over 70 countries globally. But our focus on tackling climate change and safeguarding biodiversity has led us to prioritize 4 places globally. Places that we've identified as having the most potential to simultaneously address biodiversity and climate change. These places are the Amazon, an area in Borneo, Kenya, and the Appalachians. So that's right, Eastern Kentucky and our mountains right in our backyard are globally significant for conservation. In terms of biodiversity, the Appalachians are a global hotspot. This landscape has 20,000 animal species, over 10,000 plant species, 80% of US and Canadian freshwater fish species are found here, and there is nowhere else on the planet that's more important for salamanders, which is not surprising because these are the oldest mountains in the world, which is also why they're some of the smallest. Erosion has definitely taken its toll. To safeguard biodiversity, animal populations need to be able to move and adjust their ranges. This is an electronic circuit model graphic, which sounds complicated, but I'll explain it. So this shows resistance to movement for mammal, bird, and amphibian populations. So consider areas that have high resistance to movement. Those areas would be cities, intensive row crop agriculture. So these are areas that animals can't move easily through. On the other side, areas with low resistance to movement would be intact forests, intact wetlands, these natural habitats. So the most important climate migration corridor in the entire United States is right here up that Appalachian spine. It's a very concentrated corridor and really important. And also of interest is a recent analysis in the journal Nature found that on average, real populations, so this isn't modeled, this is actual species populations, move upslope 36 feet a decade and have moved north of the equator 11 miles a decade. The really interesting part about this is that the last major migration analysis, which was published in 2003, these real data are showing 2 to 3 times the rate of species population changes. So even models that occurred about 10 years ago, we're seeing faster movement of populations. And of course, the Appalachians are also critical for people as well as nature. These mountains provide 75% of source drinking water to the region. They sequester 56% of all above ground carbon in the eastern US, and they provide tremendous economic benefit through recreation and outdoor tourism. We think the Nature Conservancy is well poised to deliver lasting impact in the Appalachians due to the scale of our work, the fact that we have a 50+ year history of effective conservation and partner building, and we have a solutions-oriented approach. And our vision is pretty ambitious for this landscape. We want to build a healthy, resilient, and connected Appalachian landscape where both people and nature thrive. And we have several ways that we're going to achieve this vision. The first is through land protection. So that migrations and motion corridor I showed you, we want to protect the lands that are part of that corridor to the tune of 5 million acres. It's a big job. Next, we want to not just protect these lands, we want to make sure that there's high quality habitat, that we're managing for resiliency. And we want to improve land management on 13 million acres in this landscape. And we'll be focusing on this second bullet for the remainder of our lunch and learn. But I will mention the third bullet, which is sequestering 30 million tons of carbon per year through natural climate solutions. Focusing on our managing for resiliency work, we have 3 key work streams in the Appalachians: forest and degraded land restoration, prescribed fire, and climate adapted forestry. And again, today we're going to focus on forest and degraded land restoration. But I will say the Nature Conservancy in Kentucky and beyond, we have an incredible prescribed fire program that continues to grow bigger and bigger and expand outside of Kentucky. That work is led by Chris Miner, and it deserves its own lunch and learn. So hopefully that's a teaser for a future lunch and learn topic. So we won't focus on that today. Okay, so big picture, let's talk science. Kentucky has tremendous potential to contribute to climate goals via reforestation efforts. A recent science product showed that there are 6.1 million acres of opportunity in Kentucky to restore forest cover for climate mitigation. If achieved, this would be the same equivalent to removing 3.4 million cars from the road. A lot of the areas identified in this work are mineland areas in eastern Kentucky, also frequently flooded wetland areas in the western part of the state that are currently in agriculture. And not to get into the details of the study, but there are other areas identified that are a little trickier to work with around the bluegrass, but we won't get into that today. And then the last science snippet I wanted to share with you all before passing the microphone to Chris is this recent product, which a national science team at the Nature Conservancy just developed. This is hot off the press. This team wanted to answer the question of which degraded minelands are most important to restore for forest connectivity. So the analysis evaluated where are minelands actually providing a barrier for species movement and a real fragmentation of that forest habitat. This is a graphic of the property Chris is about to talk to you about. It's the Cumberland Forest property. It's managed by the Nature Conservancy. And I want to draw your attention to the blue, darkest blue in this graphic. It's high gain restored. These are the areas that have been identified as really critical in restoring that forest connectivity and planting forest. So reforesting these areas on this property should be a priority for this corridor, and we are certainly making it a priority. So with that, I will go ahead and pass the microphone to Chris, who's going to tell you about our actual efforts on this property.
All right, next slide, Lindsay. Thank you, Dana, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Just a little bit of, Dana did a great job of the bigger picture perspective for the Central Apps and the importance of it. And for me, little background, I grew up in Knox County, which is in one of the counties where this Cumberland Forest property is. And it's very very inspirational to me to see the Central Apps, named focused on TNC as a global focal priority area. A lot of press around Eastern Kentucky and the Appalachians that is very negative, and to see the focus on such a positive light is a great thing. And consider myself very lucky to be working in this realm. So thank you all for being here. I know everyone's busy, but thank you all for joining us for the afternoon. We appreciate it. So the first part of this is obviously, where do you work? This is our Cumberland Forest project, which was purchased by an impact investment group, I think 4 years ago, that is managed by the Nature Conservancy. It's 250,000 acres across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. 55,000 acres of this property is here in Kentucky, in Knox, Bell, and Leslie counties. So that's kind of, when you look at a project reforestation at this scale, it's, where do you start? And I think for TNC, it's always, let's start with what we have some control over. And this is, this 55,000 acres here in the state. Next slide, please. This was a site that I'll take no credit for starting. This project was initiated before I got here last November. I give Chris Miners on the call. I give him and Dana and whoever else was involved with a lot of the legwork was done as far as the planning for the project. So, thank them for that. I walked into the initial, okay, now it's time to get the project on the ground. And what you're looking at is typical of East Kentucky, a lot of acreage, of the 55,000 acres that the Cumberland Forest property makes up in Kentucky. A lot of it is forested, but there is, up to, 10,000 acres of this reclaimed mine land that's in various stages of reclamation. And it's typically invasive species. There's a lot of autumn olive. There's a lot of sericea, fescue. And it's got a lot of issues with soil quality, compaction. This site, for instance, was probably reclaimed in the early 2000s, 2003 to 2005 range. And this was kind of what it was in last November when we kind of went up there to start this project. So not a lot of growth. The soil's so compacted, it's hard for trees to grow and get the roots going. So this is what we started with, just as a picture. Next slide, please. And what we did, the project that was put in place was a great partnership with us and Green Forest Works, another nonprofit group whose sole mission is to restore mine lands in Appalachia to forest lands. They've been a great partner to us, like I said, have done a tremendous job, and their process for the restoration of these mine lands is they have to bring in the heavy equipment first, and they scrape off all the invasive species, remove that top layer of less desirable, less quality species, and then they come in with the D9 dozers similar to this, depending on the site. And these rippers are probably 5 foot long on the back, and they rip the site 2 ways, a checkerboard pattern. That loosens up that soil compaction and creates some easy rows for the tree planters to follow to plant the trees in. Next slide, please. So this is the site aerial view kind of after the ripping. It was 110 acres of actual ripped area and 148 acres total, because what they also included was some of these slopes that had incredibly sparse vegetation. If you can't see, but around this knob in the top of the mountain there in the background, there was an area that was very, very sparsely vegetated, had some active erosion going on, and they planted trees in that by hand as well. So in the end, we ended up with 140 acres of reforestation that for the site that is going to end up being a much better habitat in the future than we had, and much quicker growing as well. Next slide, please. After the site is ripped, but vegetation is removed and the site is ripped, professional tree planters came in. This group was from Williams Forestry and Associates. So they do have an office here in Kentucky in Lexington. I think they're companies out of Georgia. And these folks were amazing. They come in and hand plant these trees, and in a matter of a week, they had all of this planted. And it was, granted, it's a large crew. They bring a crew of 40 or so people. So it's but they do a very good job of, they mix the tree species from the bundles. They try to use the kind of the microclimate of the site to put more wetter, species that are more wet tolerant in a wetter area, and try to move them around to where they're more naturally going to be based on the area conditions. Next slide, please. And then after that site was planted, we did have, prior to this area in May, after the tree planters came through, we did hold out a 10-acre site that I'll have to give our other partners, Beam Suntory, a plug. They had a wonderful field day up here with their employees and some partners from Beam Suntory, and did the final 10 acres of this tree planting was done in April. Had a great 2-day event, hand planted the remaining 10 acres of trees. And I think it was over 6,000 trees we planted those 2 days, and the conditions were miserable. It was rainy both days, muddy and nasty. A lot of our staff were there as well, but they got it done and did an incredible job. And since then, we've kind of been monitoring the site. This was a photo from our board meeting. We took the board up there in May. We had the event in April, board meeting in May. We had another event up there with another tour up there with Rocky Mountain Network Foundation and IFWIF folks in August to look at the site, and IFWIF's providing some funding for some of our projects as well. And it's just kind of monitor the site. These next slides will just kind of show the progression since, early February when this was planted. Next slide, please. So that was from May, and this is August. The vegetation has came on tremendously. The site was planted to primarily white oak and shortleaf pine. That was probably 75% of those tree species. And then there was another smattering of some other oak and hickory species, black cherry, persimmon, wild plum, kind of red bud, and hazelnut. And then it was also seeded broadcast with native warm season grass and forbs, which is a lot of what you see coming up in that ground cover. Did a tremendous job. Overall, there were over 102,000 tree species planted on the site. 148 acres on that. Next slide. And this is just some drone footage of the site after the fact. This is in August as well. And if you look and you notice these slight depressions, little blank spot, small areas of no trees, that was a kind of a side project that went along with this. That was kind of a bonus. We didn't really plan this, but UK approached us about doing some shallow water area wetlands in this site, because a lot of the water quality in East Kentucky issues, and these sites are really important, especially up on these mountaintops, to wildlife and amphibians and bats. So they asked if they could scatter some of these through that site, and we were more than happy to allow that. So we've got like 18 shallow water wetlands scattered across the 148 acres as well. So, and UK's going to do some monitoring on them as we move forward. Next slide. And basically this was some of the tree species. They got close-ups. It was this is a white oak. Next slide, please, is the shortleaf. And then next slide is just showing some of the wildflowers and native grasses coming on. It's came on tremendously. And in the background of Lindsay, can you back up 3 slides, I think, to the drone? Yeah, that one. In the background of this, going back to Dana's discussion about some of the connectivity, a lot of this science behind the most important places to work wasn't completely done yet when we started this project, but the planning was spot on anyway. Behind us, all the woods you see on the background there is Kentucky Ridge State Forest, which this project directly butts up against. So it's establishing that connectivity to an existing mature forest community as it is. And the overall long-term goal of this will monitor this site over the next several years with our partners. Green Forest Works will be monitoring as well. We have a hunter access agreement, WMA agreement, with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, who's interested in the management for the site, and then obviously the neighbor, the Kentucky Division of Forestry. So we'll take a close look at this site over the next several years, and the ultimate goal is to manage it with prescribed fire and have it to be kind of an oak shortleaf savanna type habitat. I talked to Kentucky fish folks about, because this is a high priority elk area for them, and they felt like that combination and that style of management could be a great asset to the elk herd. And that, they're going to have some woods, but still enough open lands in between and underneath to provide some grazing opportunity for the elk. Obviously, it'll be good for small game as well, and pollinators, we hope, in the future. Next slide, Lindsay, sorry. You can go to the end. Yeah, next slide. And, basically that's kind of the process with Green Forest Works. We have hope to do a lot more of this. That was the initial project. We have another 100-acre project going on and planned for this year in Leslie County, and another 300 to 500 acres that I'm trying to get on the books as well. We have a lot of challenges working with this kind of ground. Obviously, the compaction, the issues, the mining permit issues that you have to work through, as well as just access to the properties. But that's a start, and we have big plans for a lot more of this in the future. And that that's a great partner, and Green Forest Works has helped us to do this project. And again, hope to do many, many more in the future. And I think we're going to hold questions to the end. So with that, I'll pass it over to Haley Lynch. This is our communications and marketing manager, to give you all a sneak peek at a really exciting video.
Hi, everyone. This videography project tells the story of our reforestation work in the Central Appalachians, specifically in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Alongside our partners, we have planted millions of trees in these 3 states, bringing formerly mined landscapes back from invasive species to healthy young forests. Our video isn't completely finished yet, but we're excited to give you a sneak peek of the project. Thank you.
The Appalachian region is incredibly important. The forests here are biodiverse. We have some of the most biodiverse amphibian and crustacean populations in the world. And in terms of climate change, retaining these forests is crucial.
Part of what makes Central Appalachia so unique is that we have the northernmost extent of the southern species here colliding with the southernmost of the northern species here.
We've got large tracts of contiguous forest, which are important for the megafauna that still reside in this region.
And these forests once extended widely across the globe. But half of these forests have been cleared, and what remains is fragmented.
Since the early 1980s through the early 2000s, mining companies converted hundreds of thousands of acres across the Appalachian region from biodiverse forests into these non-native grasslands.
And so over the last century, this landscape, Central Appalachia, have been heavily altered by resource extraction.
And in some cases, we haven't been that gentle on nature when we've extracted those resources. We've compacted the soil, and we've taken more than nature can very quickly be resilient to it.
So beyond coal mining, the forests of the eastern United States and globally are under a lot of threats, from deforestation, forest fragmentation, biodiversity loss, development, invasive pests and pathogens. We've lost one major tree species almost every decade for the 19th century.
Together, we're restoring former minelands from the Allegheny Front in Pennsylvania to spruce forests in the highlands of West Virginia, to dry oak hickory forests in Kentucky and Tennessee.
The Nature Conservancy is the only conservation organization working in every state across the Appalachian landscape.
We bring science to the table, we bring funding where we can, and are excited to empower our partners to bring our restoration vision to life.
A holistic approach to reforestation on this site requires removing the unwanted vegetation, the invasive exotic species, ripping up that compacted ground to loosen it so that the trees can grow to their full potential, then sowing native wildflowers and native warm season grasses to benefit pollinators, insects, and birds, and then planting a diverse mix of native trees and shrubs across the site.
Last year we planted about 250,000 red spruce, 250,000. We'll plant probably close to 200,000 red spruce this year, but that's really just one of, dozens of species that are being planted.
When the Nature Conservancy and our partners are designing conservation strategies, restoration strategies, we're thinking about the whole ecosystem.
So it's really about more than just sticking trees in the ground, because part of what we're trying to accomplish here is building the soil back up that can support a more biodiverse array of species.
If a species habitat is broken into little pieces, it can't, a salamander's not going to be able to crawl, 5 miles to the north to the next patch of spruce. So a lot of our restoration efforts is focused on connectivity.
We who are living downstream of this restored site are also receiving the benefits in cleaner air, cleaner water, and reduced flooding risk.
The only thing I can say, whenever we plant trees, it's a good investment. That will help with the global warming, and it's the best we can do.
They've planted over 60 species of trees and woody shrubs, and that's unprecedented. I don't know of any other ecosystem restoration work where there's so much effort that's going into finding, collecting, assembling as many pieces as going into the forest restoration work here. It's really exciting.
We really have an opportunity to recover lands that matter for generations.
As I walk around these areas and I see the oaks and shortleaf pine growing, I see the flowers blooming, I know that in 60 and 80 years we're going to have a biodiverse, thriving forest on this land again.
The restoration community and the Appalachians has accomplished a lot, but there's still so much to be done. We're inspired by the nearly a million acres that is still left to be restored.
That was great. I can't wait to see the final version. That was quite the sneak peek. Thank you, Haley. So that concludes our formal presentation, and we now have time to open it up to Q&A and discussion. So there's a couple ways you can ask a question. Feel free to type an R in the chat. R stands for raise your hand, or you can raise your hand using the icon on Zoom. Or if you have a burning question, feel free to just jump in and ask it. So while we give everyone time to think about their questions, I'll tee it off with a question for Chris. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about TNC's goals for reforestation in Kentucky? Do you have Kentucky specific goals?
Thanks, Manny. Yes. Yeah, we just completed our strategic plan, and then we've got a goal to establish 2,500 acres of improved reforestation in the next 5 years.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we'll open it up now to other questions that folks may have. Don't be shy. Jim, go ahead.
A couple questions. With the particular land that you were highlighting, who owns that land?
Go ahead, Garland.
That's owned by TNC Impact Investment Group and managed by the Nature Conservancy.
Can you just say something about what the TNC Investment Group is?
Chris, you want me to jump in there? Or?
Yeah, that'd be a good question for Dave.
Yeah, sure. So Jim, it's a great question. So back in, it started actually back in 2013, where the Nature Conservancy started to look at what it was really going to take to protect land at the scale we needed to across this system. And we were, candidly, we were winning a lot of battles, but we weren't really winning the war because we were just through our standard approach, we're preserving relatively small tracts of land, important, biodiverse, great connectors, but we weren't getting to that scale. So we knew we needed a different approach. And so we took us about 6 years to both get the deal with the landowner and pull together the investors. But the deal on Cumberland Forest was funded by mainly private impact investors. So investors who want to see a financial return on their investment, but they also want their investment to do direct societal and environmental good. So the Nature Conservancy is the managing partner of Cumberland Forest LLC, and we have about 20 different investors in the property. And those investors are getting financial returns based on a California Air Resources Board carbon project that's on the property. There is ongoing forestry operations on the property, all under Forest Stewardship Council certification, but we are logging the land in a sustainable manner. And we're also doing some recreational leases, which also bring in some revenue, but the primary revenue source is carbon and forestry. The Nature Conservancy is the managing partner, and that gives us full control over the conservation and management decisions on the property, including this reforestation effort.
Okay. Second question. Are there specific things that you're hoping for or looking for as far as people being involved in this, supporting it? In other words, what help do you need?
That's a great question. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Well, on a lot of fronts. I mean, most fundamentally, none of our work would be possible without the support from our donors. So folks supporting the Nature Conservancy broadly are supporting this work in the Appalachians, the reforestation efforts, as well as all the other strategies and work we're doing. So I can't pass up the opportunity to say philanthropic support really, really matters. The other place where people can be involved is when we do have additional planting opportunities, we will at times need volunteers to help with those plantings. As Chris said, a lot of the planting gets done with professional crews, but it was a really inspiring experience to have a big team from Beam Suntory come out and be able to connect really directly with what their parent company was supporting financially by getting folks out on the ground. So volunteers is another way that people can get involved. And I think the third way I would say is just sharing this story with your friends, with your networks. Chris Garland mentioned it at the outset, talking about his personal connection to this land from where he grew up, and referencing that a lot of the stories we hear about Eastern Kentucky are very negative, a region in decline, people leaving, economies going downhill. We really think there are a ton of positive stories. Nature is at the heart of many of them. And the more we can tell those stories, the better off we're all going to be in bringing this region back to its true potential.
Thanks.
Thanks, David. So one question in the chat is around choosing species for these restoration efforts. And I'll give Chris Miner full credit on the planting mix for this initial project that Garland just presented on, but we were seeking to align with two really important initiatives, the shortleaf pine initiative and the white oak initiative for this project. So the key species were shortleaf pine and white oak, but then yes, we absolutely want to maximize biodiversity with our planting mix. And so a suite of other native species were also included, but there's a tremendous amount of interest in restoring shortleaf pine and also making sure that we have long-term white oak sustainability. So those were our key targets for this project. We also have another question. I'd like to hear a little bit more about Green Forest Works. Chris Garland, do you want to share a little bit about our relationship with them and how they work?
Yeah, I dropped their website in the chat there as well for everyone if you want to look more on your own. But Green Forest Works has been around, I think, for about 20 years. We worked with them in my role at Kentucky Fish and Wildlife previously as well on some projects. They utilize volunteers and donations and grant funding. And again, their goal is to reforest, reclaim land property. They're a nonprofit group and they work tremendously well. I know they've done work here in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, West Virginia. I think they've recently been doing some work in Australia from talking to Chris Barton as well. So they're a fabulous organization that has been a tremendous partner for us for sure, because this work isn't cheap. Getting back to original question a little bit, this process with Green Forest Works uses is about, just over $2,000 an acre to get done. By the time you mobilize the equipment, get equipment on site and do the heavy equipment operation, plus the trees themselves and planting, it's not cheap. So I really applaud them and their efforts. They do a tremendous job, and they're more than willing to work with us on species mixes and what we need for that particular site. And if it's something out of the ordinary, they go above and beyond to make it happen.
And I'll also add that Dr. Chris Barton with UK, who is the president for Green Forest Works, he was recently invited to Australia because this problem of soil compaction on mine lands and how to get forests to grow, it's one that he and his team have really done a phenomenal job solving, to the point that they're being invited globally to help other countries solve that same problem. Okay. Lots of good stuff in the chat. Where do we find more information about volunteer opportunities? So right now, we do not have, scheduled volunteer opportunities for these tree plantings, but in the future, if we do have them, I would think that being in touch with our philanthropy team would be a great first step. If you are interested, send an email to any member of our staff, and we can go ahead and get a list compiled of people that we need to reach out to for those opportunities. Next question, do we have a problem with deer and other species eating the plantings? Chris, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, there will be some of that. East Kentucky is historically a lower deer density area. With it being more woodland and less open ground, doesn't carry the same densities of deer that Central Kentucky and Western Kentucky do. So that's a good thing for our tree survival. But, we also have elk over in the area. So there will be some mortality from that. And I think one of the other questions was about monitoring, and we will be monitoring that. The planting rate was planted at a higher rate than expected for survival. So Green Forest Works takes that into consideration, that there will be some mortality due to just natural mortality, and also as far as some predation from deer, elk, whatever else, rabbits, whatever else may graze upon our trees. So that's part of it, and they'll be, they'll look at it again. We'll be monitoring it annually as well. And Green Forest Works will come back in if there's a spot where we have some, overly heavy predation or loss, and then they'll help us replant those areas as well.
And I do know that the wetland habitats that were created on this first mineland planting will have an extensive University of Kentucky monitoring plan. And those have been tremendously successful in West Virginia and other places for amphibians. Next question is from Jeff Soul. What is the acreage of the dark blue priority restoration areas on Cumberland Forest? At 500 acres per year, how long will it take to get this planted? What is the cost to get this done? I'll have to get back to you on the exact acres, Jeff, on Cumberland Forest. I don't know that offhand, but I'll get back to you on that. Cost is about $2,000 an acre for this best-in-class restoration in terms of native grasses and high-quality, diverse mix of trees. I will say our biggest barrier right now, Chris Garland touched on this, it's really a planning work stream. As you all know, with the changes in the coal industry right now, identifying areas that are out of bond for coal permitting is one of our biggest challenges. We actually have a shelf-ready planning work stream. We applied for a federal grant to fund to help us identify areas that are out of bond and areas that are accessible for a D9 dozer. So that planning work stream is mission critical. And we're hoping once we can get that accomplished that we can ramp up to even more than 500 acres per year to get this done. But a lot of those dark blue areas, they don't take into consideration things that are active coal permits. So for some of those areas, we may not be able to work in them right now. They're not shelf ready, if that makes sense. Okay, I think we have 1 more minute left. So I want to thank you all for the rich dialogue and questions, and also really appreciate your time joining us over the lunch hour to hear about all of this important work. So we so appreciate you all, and we'll record this, and we hope to have you share it with your friends and contacts as well.
Thanks so much for being with us. And Jeff Soul is a former employee of the Nature Conservancy, so he gets to ask those tough questions and he no longer has to answer them.
Exactly.
I will say, Jeff, as we're breaking up now at the end of the presentation, I will say the short answer to your question on how long will it take is too long. And so part of our efforts are getting this sort of flywheel spinning, if you will, to learn how to do this quicker, get more lands available for the planting, and get the story told more widely so we can bring in more resources, because we certainly have to increase the pace. There's no doubt about that.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Take
all.
care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your day. Happy holidays.